He came for pie. He left with a girl no one else would save. The roar of 20 Harley-Davidson engines didn't just announce their arrival. It shook the very foundation of Maple Creek, a town where the most dangerous thing that ever happened was a raccoon getting into the church's donation box. When Jack's Hammer Callahan rolled his customized black chopper to a stop in front of Pearl's diner, the locals pressed their faces to the windows like children watching a thunderstorm. But nobody, not the sheriff, not the mayor, not the old-timers nursing their coffee, was prepared for what the biker gang leader would do next. Because Jax didn't come to start a fight. He came to save a girl nobody else had bothered to see. Before we go any further, if you believe that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment below, because stories like this one only matter when we pass them on. Jax had been leading the Iron Vipers for 12 years, a patch of territory stretching 3 states, and he'd seen enough blood and betrayal to fill a dozen crime novels. But at 45, with gray threading through his beard and a limp from a knife fight he never spoke about, he'd grown tired. Not of the road was the only honest thing left, but of the hardness, the way the world expected him to be a monster just because he looked like one. Tonight his crew had stopped in Maple Creek for nothing more than cheap pie and a place to piss before the final stretch to the Nevada run. He hadn't planned on noticing the waitress. He hadn't planned on anything at all. Her name was Ellie, though nobody in town used it with any real warmth. 23 years old, she'd been waitressing at Pearl's since she was 16, back when her smile could light up a diner on a cloudy Tuesday. But that was before Kevin. Kevin was the sheriff's nephew, a man with a boy's face and a devil's hands, and he'd made Ellie his project 3 years ago. The bruises came and went like seasons, sometimes hidden under long sleeves, sometimes blooming yellow and purple along her collarbone where a button-down shirt couldn't quite cover. The town knew, of course they knew, but Kevin's uncle wore the badge, and Ellie never said a word, and Maple Creek had built its entire identity on not asking questions. So the waitress served her coffee with trembling hands, and the customers left their tips in silence, and everyone pretended that the flinch in her shoulders was just a bad back. When Jax walked into Pearl's that October evening, the bell above the door chimed like a warning. His men fanned out to a corner booth, their leather vests creaking, their laughter low and rumbling. Ellie approached their table with a pad and pencil, her eyes fixed on the floor. Jax ordered black coffee and apple pie. That's when she reached across to set down his mug, and her sleeve rode up just enough. The bruise was fresh, purple at the center, fading to green at the edges, wrapped around her wrist like a bracelet made of pain. Jax didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked at her face for the first time, really looked, and saw the way her left eye didn't open all the way her smile was a muscle memory of something that used to be real. Ellie felt his gaze and pulled her sleeve down so fast she nearly knocked over the sugar caddy. "Sorry," she whispered, though she hadn't done anything wrong. That was the thing about survivors. They apologized for existing. Jax said nothing. He ate his pie, he drank his coffee, he watched her move between tables, counting the ways she tried to be small. When Kevin walked in an hour later, the air changed. He was handsome in that clean-cut way that fools mistake for goodness. Baseball cap, polo shirt, a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He slid into a booth and snapped his fingers at Ellie. Not called her name, snapped, like she was a dog. Jax's hand tightened on his mug. His VP, a bear of a man named Sully, leaned over and muttered, "Not our town, boss, not our fight." And that was the truth. The Iron Vipers had a code: you don't bleed where you don't belong. Jax had built that code himself after watching good men go to prison for caring too much about strangers. But codes had a way of cracking when you saw something that reminded you of your own mother, your own sister, your own goddamn daughter who hadn't spoken to you in 6 years because you chose the road over her birthday. Ellie brought Kevin his burger. He grabbed her wrist, the same bruised one, and pulled her close, whispering something that made her go pale as milk. She nodded, stiff and mechanical, and when she walked away her limp was more pronounced. Jax noticed that too. He noticed the way she disappeared into the kitchen and came back with red-rimmed eyes. He noticed how nobody in the diner looked up. Not the cook, not the old men, not the teenage busboy who pretended to wipe the same table for 10 minutes. That was the real crime, Jax realized, not the bruise, the silence. He stood up. Sully grabbed his arm. Jax, don't. But Jax was already moving, not toward Kevin, not yet, but toward the jukebox in the corner. He fed it $1 and punched the buttons for something slow and old. A Patsy Cline song his mother used to hum. Then he walked to Ellie, who was stacking clean plates near the pass, and he did something that made the entire diner freeze. He extended his hand, palm up, fingers loose, an invitation, not a demand. Dance with me, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Just one dance, right here. Ellie stared at his hand like it was a grenade. Her lip trembled. Behind her, Kevin laughed, a short, mean sound. You heard her, old man. She doesn't dance. But Jax didn't look at Kevin. He kept his eyes on Ellie, and in them was something she hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not hunger, not the cold calculation of a man who wanted something from her. Just patience. Just the quiet offer of a moment where she didn't have to be afraid. She took his hand. The diner watched as a grizzled biker and a bruised waitress swayed between the tables. Patsy Cline singing about crazy dreams and lonely hearts. Ellie's hand rested on Jax's shoulder, and his other hand sat gently on her waist, nowhere near the bruises. She cried without making a sound. Tears rolled down her cheeks and dropped onto his leather vest, and he didn't wipe them away. He just kept moving, slow and steady, like a man who knew that some wounds couldn't be fixed with words. When the song ended, he leaned close and said 3 things. First, you don't deserve any of this. Second, I'm not leaving until you're safe. Third, pack a bag. Kevin was on his feet by then, face red, phone already in his hand, calling his uncle, no doubt, calling for backup, calling for the world to stay exactly the way it was. But Jax had already nodded towards Sully, and Sully had already pulled out his own phone and texted a number that connected to a women's shelter 3 towns over. One run by a former Viper's widow who knew how to make people disappear. The Iron Vipers didn't just ride, they had resources, they had safe houses. They had a whole network of people who had once been exactly where Ellie was now. The sheriff arrived in 5 minutes, lights flashing, hand on his gun. But he wasn't prepared for what he found. 20 bikers standing in a loose circle around Ellie, who was clutching a small duffel bag, her uniform already exchanged for jeans and a hoodie. And Jax, standing between her and Kevin, utterly calm. She's leaving, Jax said. Voluntarily, with us. You can either let her go or you can explain to the state police why there are 20 witnesses who saw you ignore a domestic abuse case for 3 years. He held up his phone. I've been recording since the moment he snapped his fingers. Every flinch, every whisper, every bruise you chose not to see. The town held its breath. The sheriff's face went through 5 emotions in 3 seconds. Anger, calculation, fear, shame, and finally something that looked almost like relief. He stepped aside. Kevin screamed, but Kevin had never been brave without a badge behind him, and now the badge was gone. Ellie climbed onto the back of Jax's Harley, her arms wrapped around his waist, and as the engines roared to life, she pressed her face into his leather jacket and sobbed, not from fear, but from the shocking, terrifying, beautiful weight of being chosen. They rode through the night, 20 bikes cutting a path through the darkness, and by dawn they delivered her to a yellow farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a woman named Marta, who hugged her like a daughter. Jax didn't say goodbye. He just handed Ellie a piece of paper with a phone number and said, "You call if you ever need anything. Anything at all." Then he mounted his bike and drove away, his throat tight, thinking about a girl with a bruised wrist and the daughter who wouldn't take his calls. Maple Creek talked about that night for years. But more importantly, things changed. The sheriff quietly resigned. Kevin moved away under a cloud of whispers, and the diner put up a small sign near the jukebox. If you need help, ask for the blue plate special. It was a code, passed from survivor to survivor, and it saved 3 more women over the next 18 months. All because a biker gang leader noticed what everyone else refused to see. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who might be silently fighting their own battle, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. And right now, before you do anything else, comment the word ride if you believe that courage can come from the most unlikely heroes. Ellie never forgot the sound of those engines. 10 years later, when she became a counselor for domestic abuse survivors, she kept a photo on her desk, a grainy shot of 20 Harleys parked outside a yellow farmhouse. And on the back, in handwriting that had grown steadier with time, she'd written, "The loudest roar I ever heard was the sound of someone finally stopping to look." Sometimes redemption doesn't wear a white hat. Sometimes it rides a black chopper, carries a worn-out heart, and has the decency to offer a dance before it saves your life.